and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 195th episode, our guest is Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is a historian, educator, and commentator on fascism, authoritarian leaders, and propaganda. She is professor of history and Italian studies at New York University and an advisor to Protect Democracy. She writes for CNN, other media outlets, and her latest book, Strongmen, From Mussolini to the Present, which was published by Norton in 2020, examines the authoritarian playbook illiberal leaders have used for a century. Her Substack newsletter, Lucid, examines threats to democracy and how to counter them. Follow her on Twitter at Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And now on to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this evening. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, I just finished listening to the audiobook version of your book 7 minutes ago.
Okay.
So I made it just under the wire. I've listened to every word, though. So it's really, it's great. And yeah, it's we'll get to all the contents of it, of course. But yeah, go ahead and just to start us off here, would you mind just introducing yourself for people who don't know who you are?
I'm Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I'm a professor of history at New York University, and I write a lot for the media, and I'm the author of Strongmen.
Yes, excellent book. Very engrossing. And an important subject, and will continue, I think, to be timely going forward, and it certainly has been. So, I guess, what drew you to this subject in the first place? Obviously, Trump, of course, happened, but, you obviously make a lot of parallels throughout history, and kind of what sparked your interest in this subject, first of all?
I grew up in a beautiful seaside town in California, Pacific Palisades, which wouldn't seem like a place where you'd start thinking about grim dictatorships, but it was a place where a lot of famous intellectuals took refuge from Nazi Germany, like Thomas Mann and composers and people. So I came to know about these people, and I was just very curious what it meant to go from Berlin to this seaside town. So I started investigating them, and then at UCLA, I took a seminar on like these exiles, and so I decided to go to grad school and focus on. I was going to do Germany, and then I switched to doing fascist Italy. But this is kind of how it got started, because I didn't have any family connections to anyone affected by fascism. So it was this kind of improbable geographic thing.
Right. Yeah. I can see how that would be a bit of maybe a contradiction on the face of it, but like you said, there were people that you were growing up around that had been through it, and I want to talk a little bit about the subtitle of the book is was it Mussolini? It says Mussolini to, what is it?
To the present.
To the present, right. So why did you choose Mussolini as the beginning? Obviously, you had to narrow the scope somehow, right? So you kind of focus in on these case studies throughout history that you talk about. You leave some examples maybe that other people might leave out. You kind of have to sharpen the lens a little bit to get what you're saying across. Why did you choose Mussolini, and how did you choose not to talk about certain other rulers throughout history? I'm thinking of, I was listening to your description of these strongmen, and I was like, that's kind of Kim Jong-un, that whole North Korean dynasty thing. But then that's a little bit different. That's more of a family thing too. But I don't know. I'll let you explain. But
yeah. So for that question, I did have to limit it somehow, or it becomes like an encyclopedia. And
right.
I am a historian of fascism. I wrote 2 books on fascism. So I decided to focus on mostly right-wing authoritarians. And I wanted to show the through lines. So, what happens when fascism and Nazism implode, like in World War II. And then I show how many neo-Nazis and neo-fascists went to Franco's Spain, then they go to the military juntas in, Central Latin America, and on up to Berlusconi in Italy in the 90s and 2000s, who brings neo-fascists into the government and rehabilitates the right, which is he's a precedent for a lot of things Trump does.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant that, and there was one other reason. I wanted to look at people who wrecked a democracy, or a state that had democratic elements, and that meant that I wasn't going to look at people like North Korea leaders because it's handed to them,
Mm-hmm.
or China, where you take over in an already closed system. So that's why. So Mussolini, he always gets a short shrift compared to Hitler, and there's very good reasons people focus on Hitler. But Mussolini was the one who actually kind of wrote the authoritarian playbook, because he was there in the 1920s, and he's important for our days because he was actually a prime minister in a democracy for 3 years before he declared dictatorship. And it was this big experiment he was doing, because in Russia, you had Lenin, who died in 1924 and had a personality cult, and so did Mussolini. But Stalin doesn't come in until 28. So Mussolini's the one in the 20s who's like inventing all of these things. He's persecuting the press, he's doing propaganda. And a story I talk about is, sometimes we think that Mussolini copied Hitler, but it was the opposite. And Hitler had this huge man crush on Mussolini. And he was constantly writing to him and trying to get his autograph and trying to make him his mentor, because Hitler was very frustrated because he couldn't get into power. He had his putsch, and then it didn't work, and he went to prison. And Mussolini didn't want anything to do with Hitler. He thought he was a loser. So so I tell the story through the book of their kind of tormented, relationship, and then eventually the tables turn. But Mussolini was the pioneer for the authoritarian playbook. So that's why I started.
I think interesting through line in all you talk about the different eras of all this, and I think an interesting through line is that even though the media changes, mass media itself is really important to the story. I mean, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, Mussolini, obviously, you said he laid down these archetypes that others followed for the century that followed, and I have to think that radio, newspapers, social media now, of course, television, that all figures in greatly, and I don't think that these strongmen would really have the hold over people they do without it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, when we think about, because of course there were tyrants in other eras, and
right.
The thing that makes the authoritarian to have a modern authoritarian state, you need mass society, you need mass media, because propaganda depends on repetition and saturation of the mass media. It needs mass media to work, and then mass surveillance. And for that, you need mass transportation. You need a whole infrastructure that comes with modernity. And the media is really interesting. So the core of the book is, just for your listeners, it's these tools of rule, this playbook. So I have propaganda, corruption, violence, the myth of national greatness, and virility, or like machismo. So you can open the chapter on propaganda and look over 100 years what stayed the same and what changed. So the media stuff's so interesting because, like, propaganda personality cults, actually they haven't, the rules that govern them haven't actually changed at all from Mussolini to now. So for example, the holder of the personality cult has to be like a man of the people, or like an everyman. So they talk in very accessible ways, and they have direct channels of communication to their people. So Mussolini had newsreels, and Trump had Twitter. But they also have to be above all other men. So they're the everyman and they're the superman. So they're like omnipotent. Even diseases can't, that affect other men won't affect them, or they'll recover quickly. So they have all of this, and that's, you see how that fits in with the virility, machismo stuff. So that was fascinating to me, to see how in many ways nothing changed, although the tools that the media that diffuses the personality cult obviously is different. Today we have social media, but the rules of it haven't changed at all.
Definitely. Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting when you talked about how actually the repetition of like you talk about like Mussolini, like just the repetition of the phrases and the images, it kind of just creates a white noise, and it almost works against itself at a certain point. It's almost too effective. It's like people, it's always this white noise in the background now that's not really like a shock to the system the way it is when you're not constantly inundated with it. And I think mass media has a lot to do with that. So
Yeah, and social media really, in some ways, it really helps today's autocrats like Putin, Modi, etc., because it accelerates that whole repetition and saturation. And it also makes, in old days, somebody would listen to the radio or read in the newspaper, and they're not interacting. But today, you not only consume the propaganda, but when you share it or you make memes out of it, you become producers of propaganda. So you help the government a lot in that way. But there's also a flip side. I have a chapter on resistance, and I show how today resistors can, stream the police knocking on their door, which we would never hear before, right? We would read about it in books of exiles, like, oh, the police knocked on my door and I left. But now you're in the room, and people are live streaming on Twitter or Facebook as they're getting arrested. And this creates a lot of sympathy for resistors and a lot of animosity toward people like Putin. So it's a double-edged thing, social media.
Absolutely. Free Navalny, let's just say that. I got to get that guy out of there. Poor guy. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, you were totally right. And at one point I remember you lamented in the book that, we don't even know all Mussolini's crimes because they destroyed so many records, and we'll never know the true layers of corruption. We only have like the accounts of people that escaped and other, kind of first and second hand things. But a lot of those, I'm sure the fires, they just threw everything in a fire as they were running out the door. And yeah, we'll never know the full scope of it. But you're right. Now it's like we can see George Floyd, as you point out in the book, that that would have never, of course that happened, but people could dismiss it. Or remember, I mean, how they reported it, initially in that press release of how he died. It wasn't anything like what we saw in that video. And without the video, where would we be? I think we know. And people have been saying this for a long time, but now we can see it. So yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Social media does kind of help throw a light on that when it didn't get it before. So
yeah, it empowers people, and they become, in a way, citizen journalists or witnesses to abuses of power, and that's been a huge thing. And if you also think of it's about holding people accountable, and you're able to document with your smartphone. Or if you think about Me Too, and how people can come forth and about things that they used to stay silent about, which is also a form of holding people accountable. So it's no accident that men like Trump are they take all the resources of the state to shut down movements like Black Lives Matter or to discredit Me Too, because they are deathly afraid of them. Autocrats need people to be silent and subjugated. And in the summer, during the Black Lives Matter protests, Donald Trump said something that always stuck with me. He said, if you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. Because that's his view of government, is dominating. He's not interested in collaborating. He wasn't even interested in governing in the traditional sense. He was, and this was something I think a lot of Americans struggled to understand because they only had democracy. He was interested in making money for Trump Organization, which is a classic autocrat corrupt thing. You turn public office into private, in a source of private income. And then he wanted to spread hatred and keep us polarized because that helps him. And, his goals were not goals. It had nothing to do with like good government. And so that's why when coronavirus came, he just couldn't care less, and he mismanaged it. But he's always they're always on the defensive, that someone will discover their corruption, their sexual violence and all the other crimes that they commit. And so by nature, they're going to be very aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Oh man, so much I want to talk about in what you said there. But going back to something you mentioned earlier, the virility thing. I think that's a fascinating strand. I don't get it. Putin goes shirtless. Mussolini was what was he doing? He was threshing or something, shirtless with
Threshing wheat.
threshing wheat.
He stripped his shirt off
Uh-huh.
on
Right.
camera. Yeah, I put the virility chapter because I wanted to take it seriously. It's really easy to just laugh at Putin taking his
Right.
stupid ice baths and
Mm-hmm.
straddling horses and all the stuff he does without shirt on. And 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 he and Mussolini are the two bookends of this.
Mm-hmm.
And Mussolini really shocked people when he started doing it in the 1930s. He would strip his
Uh-huh.
shirt off on camera, show his muscles. He would ski shirtless. He'd be in a tiny bathing suit in the summer. But I thought that talking about this masculinity, this hyper masculinity, was important. And I'm a historian by training, and I used a lot of political scientists. I found political science work very useful on corruption and
Mm-hmm.
elites, how elites, collude. But they didn't really take the masculinity stuff seriously. It's not something that they study, and this is something I knew about. So and masculinity, the virility really hooks into the other tools because this hyper masculine man is also a man who gets away with things. He's above the law. And so a lot of these guys, when they come into power, they're already criminals. They have criminal records or they're under investigation. And they have a glamour for some men and women because they're the man who gets away with things.
Mm-hmm.
And so this connects to them. And they also use their body as a way of, they come to symbolize the nation's strength. Putin's very good in doing this. And everything that they will be whatever the nation needs them to be. And so their body
Mm-hmm.
actually becomes very important. So Trump can't, I wasn't allowed to have the rights to reproduce this for the book. So it's not in there, but Trump can't show his own body. So he borrows other men's bodies. And in 2019, he tweeted, it wasn't even a retweet, it was from his account, personal account, his head,
Mm-hmm.
it's really grotesque,
Mm-hmm.
photoshopped onto Sylvester Stallone's body in Rocky
Oh
3.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this, I even said it's grotesque, you can laugh at it, but it's also deadly serious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like the whole virility chapter, I wanted to talk about that part of things.
Oh no, it's true. And I only laugh because on my way to work, there's a person that has a flag with Trump in another. I guess now that I think about it, another Sylvester Stallone role. Rambo. He's Ramboed out with the thing around his head, and he's got machine gun, and I think in
I've
one of them he's
seen
riding.
that.
Yeah, another one he might be riding a dinosaur or something. But that I
Yeah,
think yeah.
I have like a huge collection. In fact, I started a Substack newsletter called Lucid
Uh,
about like a month ago about threats to democracy, and I talk about propaganda. Write essays, but I have live chat, and I'm going to do one showing my vast collection of
oh
Trump
wow.
propaganda. I have both of those.
I'm sickly
Um,
interested in that.
No, I know it's like a weird thing, but it's important because
It is.
these men know how to become the repositories of our fantasies. They're not
Sure.
my fantasies,
Right.
but they're lots of people's fantasies. So
Yeah.
you have like Trump is John Wayne, Trump is Tarzan, Trump is, it's endless.
Mm-hmm.
Rambo. So, and one thing I found in my research is that these guys find fortune, they get support in times where society's gone through a lot of changes, and they could be gender emancipation, racial equity, workers' rights, but also when male authority feels threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And when, like after World War I, with fascism, you had so many men who, were disabled, etc. but they tend to be times when many men feel they're being eclipsed, like their status is getting lower. And so you can see here comes somebody like Trump, who's like a big guy and he's a macho, and he is going to take up their cause. So they buy into, that's where the dinosaurs and the Rambo, and it's a fantasy, but it makes them feel better.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, but I look at them and I don't see strength. I don't see, I've never, all these people you mentioned, I'm thinking through all of them, and I don't see any of them as remotely strong, even objectively, outside of my disgust for their, behavior or beliefs or whatever, or what they did. I just don't see them as strong characters. So it's just interesting to me that people don't just immediately see through them, and somehow it's like they get to project their own view of it onto them, and they're like a blank canvas or something. And I guess that, yeah, go on. But yeah,
that's it. They are performers, and they're able to. They allow people to project onto them whatever they need them to be, and in fact, they're not strong. In fact, their personalities, and sadly for us, Trump has the same personality as most of them. They are extremely brittle and insecure, which is why they're very paranoid, and that's why they can't stand to have any rivals. And they're very aggressive because they're so insecure, and so they're weak. And so somebody like Putin, I say in my book, where he managed to finally get in a position where he got the Constitution changed in 2020 so he could rule, through 2036. He's already in his late 60s. And so it's this fantasy of ruling forever. But he's become more and more repressive, and protests against him are bigger and bigger. And so when they lash out and do stuff like with Alexei Navalny, this is a sign of weakness. This is not strength.
Absolutely.
They're afraid. They're afraid of somebody like that who can really be a real rival. And so what they do is anybody who could be a viable opposition candidate and maybe run for office, they arrest them or they poison them. And Erdogan in Turkey, does the same. He's arrested hundreds of thousands of people. So they are weak, and that's one of the messages of the book, that we endow them with this strength, but they're actually weak, flawed, destructive individuals.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just thinking back to a headline I read the other day from Erdogan, where Joe Biden had finally recognized the Armenian genocide, and then Erdogan was like, well, we're going to recognize the Native American thing. It's like, is that really the best you can do? I know you are, but what am I? That's what you got?
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best. And he's busy. He's busy giving Turks the fantasy of reviving the. And I talk about this in the book. I found this really interesting because I knew about the Mussolini case, but so these guys, I have this chapter called A Greater Nation, about making the nation great. So on the one hand, they project this utopia, like everything's going to be better. I'm going to fix it, like Trump said. But they also channel this nostalgia. And in fact, look at the MAGA slogan isn't just making America great, it's making America great again. And the again is the nostalgia. So all of them hark back to some, this is the fantasy part. So Mussolini had actually the most solid. He had the Roman Empire. It's a long time ago, like thousands of years before. But he really used that. Like they were going to revive the strength. And Erdogan is obsessed with the Ottoman Empire. And it's like a whole thing in Turkey with the reviving the Ottoman Empire. Wow. And then each one has his own way. Like Bolsonaro in Brazil is very frightening. He's constantly talking about the military dictatorship, and he's in the army. And that was a better time when there was the military dictatorship. So Trump didn't have any of those things, but his was like a better time when whites, ruled supreme and everybody else knew their places. So that was his version of it. But it's always making the nation great again.
Right. Absolutely. And whether or not it was like ever that great in the first place for everyone, you know what I mean? It's like for who? Like great
Right.
for who? It wasn't great for everybody. And it's I think you talked about this being a common feature, and I was thinking about Putin. Kind of, it's almost make Russia great again, and like
Oh,
you said, he's
totally.
allowed statues of Stalin and Lenin, and he was Mr. KGB for a long time, and
It was very interesting to me that, so if we just like take that as an example, okay, the whole MAGA thing, make nation great again. So that's the idea that they're hearkening to the past. And as I said, I knew about Mussolini and the Roman Empire, but
right.
then they all do the same thing. It's so interesting. They're very, they're like, this is over 100 years all over the world, and this is how I developed the idea that there is this kind of playbook, because as with that example where they're all like reviving empires and stuff, they all make recourse to the same things.
Mm-hmm. Right, right, absolutely. This is very timely. I wonder how it was for you to turn this book in, not knowing how the election was going to turn out. I actually enjoyed this book a lot because for the same reason that I'm now enjoying. I have three kids. They're 6, 3, and now 1,
Oh,
and I'm now enjoying getting to tell them about world events, kind of with Trump in the past tense in a certain way. And
mhm.
not that we should, let our guard down in any way, but at least, it's not like, oh, I have to slog through till my oldest one is 10. I'm definitely gonna have to tell them about everything that's happening now. I've been kind of shielding them up till now, hoping it would turn out okay, so I can do like the past tense version of everything, not like, okay, this is ongoing now. I know you have to learn
I
about world
know.
events.
No,
So
when the night of the election 2016, I I was I covered the whole election for CNN Opinion. So I was writing op-eds. So all the speeches, all the debates, everything. So here we are at election night, and I went to a friend's party. I took my laptop and I had prepared, as everyone in media did. You had to prepare op-eds, at least drafts or of either outcome.
hmm
And everybody, of course, thought, that Hillary Clinton would win. And I took my daughter, who was a teenager, and all her friends were for Hillary Clinton. They had Hillary Clinton stickers on their laptops. And at a certain point at this party, I realized with dread that he was going to win. I just knew very, very early. And so I told her that we had to go home because I had the Clinton one better developed than the Trump one. And I'll never forget, just as a parent, because you're talking about like,
right.
she didn't want to leave. And she at first refused to leave because she didn't like what I was telling her. It was too
hmm
horrible to think that he could have won. And so I had to
Right.
kind of drag her out of there. And it was very hard to see her and her friends being so disappointed
hmm
like that. But in terms of writing the book, yeah, I had to turn in the book in the summer. And I had time to write about the Black Lives Matter protests, but I didn't know
Right.
what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the way these guys are and Trump's personality, I did. I had already predicted most of what he had done from in
hmm
2016. I did a lot of op-eds saying what I thought would happen, and they came true. So I said that he wouldn't be leaving quietly if he
hmm
lost, because it's an interesting thing for regular Democratic leaders with a small d. When you leave, you do something else or you work on your legacy, etc. But for men who are so weak and they need the adulation and the fame and the riches, it's like a psychological death for them,
hmm
and they can't handle it. And so they will do anything to stay in office, and they do desperate things. So I wrote about like this thing that's in political scientists call it gambling for resurrection. When rulers know they're going down and they do one last like crazy thing, like starting a war or having a coup. So I
hmm
wrote all that, not knowing, of course, like what would happen, and certainly not about January 6th.
I think that was like you said. It was pretty predictable that he's never going to admit defeat. And I saw a video of him the other day at like some buffet at Mar-a-Lago,
Yeah.
still like prattling on about like
He's like
just
like a cruise ship entertainer now. It's
yeah,
really
it's like
interesting.
yeah, it's interesting. He's like, where's the off button? Like, it's okay, dude, you lost. Like, take the L and go home. But yeah, it's interesting how it's like with Trump's Twitter account. It was so I didn't follow him on Twitter, but I felt so oppressed by his just being on Twitter and having to know like it was going to be a headline every time he tweeted something. Now it's like that psychological floating stress that's always there is totally removed, and now he's out of office, and it doesn't seem like totally a bad dream, but I kind of stop myself sometimes and I'm like, did that really just 4 years of Donald Trump, that really happened? Like that actually, like for that when it was happening, it felt like it was going to be happening forever. And then these
Yeah,
things happen and all you snap your fingers and it was like, wow, was that just all a dream?
I think that where many people are exhausted, and we also didn't have, because of all the terrible stuff he did when he lost the election for that very long period from November to January 20th.
Yeah.
We were not able to fully relax at all, really,
Mm-mm.
and enjoy the fruits of a wonderful thing that happened, which
Yeah, I
is
know.
very unusual in the history. In history, it's unusual that a people they vote out an autocrat in the middle of consolidating his power. You just don't
Mm-hmm.
see that. And so we did that, and we did it in a pandemic with voter
Mm-hmm.
suppression, with threats, and we didn't have time to celebrate that because of everything that happened. And we haven't really even digested fully January 6th. Um,
Mm-mm.
but this feeling that it was kind of uh, a kind of surreal, it seems surreal that we went through that. For this Lucid newsletter, I have a series of interviews. I have an essay every week and an interview with somebody. And I'm
Wow.
interviewing former White House correspondents
Mm.
who under Trump. And I did Jim Acosta, and this
Mm.
Wednesday I'm publishing Peter Baker from the Times.
Oh, neat.
And I asked them what it was like, and how they're feeling now. And, they're exhausted too because they were under direct, threat from him as members of the press. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we're going to need a lot of time as a nation to recover from, because what we had was a very skilled propagandist beating us over the head with his lies and waging psychological warfare. And Trump surrounded himself from the beginning with very scary individuals like Roger Stone and Steve Bannon, who had decades of experience with psychological warfare techniques. And
Mm.
all of this was unleashed onto us. All the threats, all the, getting money out of people, all of this stuff, going on was, it's a collective kind of, people can build up a kind of numbness on the other hand, on one hand, but exhaustion as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, it's like I always try to remind myself and still do that that's not normal. But at a certain point, it's like I have to like I have a life here. I have to get about my day, and I think that's what they count on, right? That's just the wearing down of people like that, and just rubbing out like any spark of like thinking it's
Yeah.
not how it's always been.
Yeah, it's a wearing down, and also, um, if you do speak out, you know, all of the trolls and haters that he encourages
Right.
are also policing, and it's some people don't have the stomach to, every time you publish something in a place like CNN where there's millions of people seeing it, you get all this hate mail, and so that's another way that over time, um, you know, criticisms of him can be worn down. Um,
Right. Well, it's like
didn't
self-censorship
Yeah,
too.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, self-censorship, and like I'm in a very privileged position because I'm a tenured professor, because people
Mm.
try to get you fired.
Oh,
They
absolutely. Yeah.
and I'm also at a private university, and so my salary isn't paid by public funds because that also can make it harder.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it was. I think that I felt like everybody can. This is what I could do. I could turn my skill set into a warning that it can happen here, and that's why I wrote the book. I was prepared, and we talked about my background, how I got into studying fascism, but it was the shock of seeing Donald Trump holding rallies and doing loyalty oaths and realizing it could happen here that led me to write the book.
Right. I wonder how much do you see a parallel with, like, you talk about a cult of personality, and I totally think that's an apt description, but what do you think about actual cult parallels? Jim Jones comes to mind, down to the hair even, and, with the sexual domination of people,
Yeah.
and the whole bit, and the adulation and the special line to God, and on and on. It seems like, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of parallels there, but
I think you're right. There are, and it's also that QAnon,
oh yeah, absolutely.
which is kind of in the Trump supporter world. It's
Absolutely.
this lure of an alternate reality, and a
Hmm.
reality that is seamless, where everything makes sense. And it's also like the lure of an in-group, a
Hmm.
community, and you're in or you're the enemy. And some people
Hmm.
find that comforting. Um, and cults tend to be very authoritarian.
Yep.
Uh, and so they're definitely, there's a reason the personality cult has the word cult in it, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that the new part of this is the flowering of the conspiracy theories and the fact that people who are in government now, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, are adherents of conspiracy theories. That's very scary because
Yeah.
that might have been going on behind the scenes before, but it wasn't something where people felt proud to make it part of their brand. That's new, and that's really
Hmm.
disturbing.
Yeah. Well, I see it as kind of like, and I wonder how you see it, in that, these leaders are very personality based. They're kind of singular in that they kind of coalesce around these strong men. It's like these individuals. So I guess that a lot of their power is in themselves, and other people that try to imitate them or like be in their mold or something, they don't quite get all the way there because they don't have the fanatical adulation or connection that the strongman that they're modeling themselves after has, or special relationship or whatever. So I worry about, of course, and I think a lot of people do, the next person that is like Trump but a little less obvious, and uses the ideas that he did, but maybe does it in a not telling all his crimes constantly on social media way, and like maybe is a little smoother about it. But is that person really gonna, they might learn from Trump and see what he did and try to imitate it, but he does have like it seems like he's a messianic figure to this loyal core base, and I don't see them, or maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I've been wrong about a lot of stuff before it happened, but do you see that floating to someone else, or do you think that they are so connected to him that they'll just follow him or his family? I guess I don't know, but
I mean, he's a special case because he came in like Berlusconi in Italy, whose personality cult survived everything: sex scandal with underage girls, everything, corruption scandals.
hmm.
Um, and so, Trump came in as this quote billionaire businessman, as a success story, and as a reality TV star. And he came from outside of politics. So that he came in with this incredibly like glamorous profile. And this not only this gave him, he's extremely skilled propagandist and performer. And he's very attentive to optics. He knows exactly what to say to people. He has no morals. And there are other people, certainly in Republican politics, who have no morals and would say anything. But they don't have his background of this glamour.
Hmm.
He has all the women around him, where all his wives are models, and he had the Miss Universe pageant. And so he's always with like these, hot women. So that's special to him. And there is something about his presence that leads people to see him in a certain way. So there isn't anybody else like that. If you think of some of the people who are sometimes mentioned who want to be, like Ted Cruz has no charisma. Josh, eh.
Right.
And the more of a threat is somebody like Tucker Carlson. Because he comes, he's already a star. American society likes stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's an extremist, and he knows he's smooth. He looks smooth, but he also knows how to appeal to people and establish a connection with them much better than somebody like Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley is quite intellectual, and he's a little remote. He doesn't have that people, personality thing.
Yeah.
So that's been Trump's secret weapon, the whole, and the family man, because he has all the others don't have that.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. But I wonder how the fact that whether he'll, of course he'll never admit it, but he lost, right? He lost by a lot. He's a loser now, right? And so his whole brand was winning. How does that affect the brand? I mean, it seems like it shatters everything to me, or I would think it was. But some of the people I mentioned, the people I pass on to work, some of the other people I pass on work they took down their Trump 2020. They put up in some cases homemade, in some cases not, Trump 2024. They're still in for it. They're up for more with the same guy, and they think he can win it all again. And
the smartest thing and the most audacious thing he did was this big lie business. Because millions of people still think he didn't really lose. And he sowed the seeds. I mean, we had 5 years of this because he started, he was preparing this election rigged stuff in case he lost in 2016.
Yes.
And he wouldn't have done a January 6th thing. That was like a self-coup to keep himself in power. But he would have claimed that the election, was rigged and invalid. So Americans had like all these years of this rigging elections business. And so that already happened. But for him to be able to, and then the victim cult, and this in the strongman books, Mussolini was the first. He's always the pioneer with everything. They have to be the victim. They take the hits for the nation. They have the enemies. And once they establish their victimhood, people actually get protective of them. And although they're very powerful, they also feel that they need to save them. And January 6th was a leader rescue operation. That's how I see it. By these like devoted followers. They were rescuing their leader. And so he managed in this brilliant way to convince millions and millions of people that he really didn't lose. And that presidency is rightfully his. So it's all about manipulating appearances, manipulating belief today. So he knows he lost. And the most shocking thing is that the Republicans are backing him up.
I know.
They had an out. They could have discarded him and gone in a slightly different direction. And instead, they doubled down, and he still has an iron control of the party. And that's not surprising if you study these dynamics like I do. Like if you read the book and you think about the durability of personality cults, it'll make more sense to you what's happening. But it's still shocking in any logical universe.
Yeah, well, it's like they think they can ride the bull or whatever, and they can't. They never can. They can never stay on through the wild swings. And they think they can, we'll just use this person to get our policy objectives, and we'll tolerate them, and they'll give us what we want, and we'll give them what they want. But it's it's never going to be a two-way street with these people. It's a one-way street, and they don't ever seem to learn that lesson. And yeah, like you said, people go around them, go down for plenty of things, but they never get to the top. You know what I mean? It's always the people around them that are dropping like flies. It boggles the mind what the like psychology of somebody that like a Mike Pence, for example, like
Yeah,
he's almost killed by Trump
but he won't talk about it. That's very disturbing. That's one of the most disturbing things because here's somebody who, he was put there because of the evangelical connection and
yes,
the Kochs, and he represented many important factions for Trump, but he was Mr. Lackey. He put
yep,
up with 4 years of humiliation and his poker face, and then look what he gets for his troubles. I've no much sympathy for him, but I wouldn't like him. No one deserves to be chased by a mob wanting to hang them.
no,
But then he's not speaking about it. And
hmm
this is the moral failing of the GOP that if Pence spoke out at what happened to him, and instead he's tweeting that the real danger is radical left, the
yeah,
radical left Biden administration. And this is, given what happened to him, this is just such bad faith.
hmm
Um, and the GOP right now, because of January 6th, they're on the defensive. And so they're having a huge propaganda push to deny the violence of January 6th or say it was left wing because they were exposed as a far right party. And this is really how I see them. Unfortunately, we've got only, other societies have lots of parties. And so they have a far right party in other places, but they're only one of 5 or 6 parties.
mm,
Here, when you only have 2 parties that really count, and one of them has become a far right authoritarian minded party, that's a huge problem. And that's what we have now.
I wanted to ask you on a different note about your Substack. How is that going? I'm interested in Substack as a format. How do you like using it?
It's good. I decided to start it with Substack's cooperation
Oh,
as a
neat.
way of because I've written, I don't know, probably 100 op-eds,
hmm
but it appealed to me as a way of writing essays that maybe have more history than many places would want. My thing, as you see in the book, I like to look at what happened in history and then how it plays out today. What are the continuities?
Right.
So my first essay was Drain the Swamp. And I talked about Mussolini draining the swamp and being a hypocrite, and Putin and Trump.
hmm
And so I've been able to do different kinds of writing and on the issues of threats to democracy. And my next one is going to be called "Why Do People Believe Liars About
mm
Propaganda?" So it's developing things that were from the book, but I'm also interviewing people, and I have found that really nice. I just interviewed Mary Trump, all kinds of people.
Oh, cool.
Uh, yeah, and then doing live chats so that you can dialogue with readers. And the newsletter phenomenon is a symptom of like our changing media environment, where
hmm
and also how algorithms increasingly determine whose stuff you see rather than your own interests. And so I think that this idea of having a direct connection with people who read your stuff, that's not necessarily possible if you write for CNN, where they've gotten rid of comments altogether because
Mm.
there was so much hatred and they weren't productive.
hmm
So I'm finding it very gratifying so far. It's
Great.
just a month old, but it's been good so far.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely sign up. Um, but yeah, what are you working on for your next book? I'm sure you're thinking about where to go now. But has Trump being out of office changed what you want to write about at all?
Um, Somewhat. I think I'm going to do some kind of very short book, much
Mm,
shorter than Strongmen, about democracy protection.
mm,
It's not really lessons learned from the Trump era, but you know how the things I've learned from um, and from reading other people and things that are important values also like accountability. I don't know how I'm going to structure it, but that's what it's going to be about.
Great. Well, I recommend everyone to read your book. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I love history. It's my favorite subject, always has been. So I really enjoyed going through. Even though you you talk about some terrible people, it was
True.
it was incredibly interesting nonetheless. I didn't know a lot of those details, so I was
And
glad to
it
learn
ends on
about
a
it.
hopeful note
It
because
does, yeah. Let's not
it's
forget
true.
that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
want to say that because there is a lot of like grim stuff
sure.
in it, and it
Uh-huh.
was not very fun to write, part of it. But I wanted to end on a hopeful note
You do.
with resistance and how the lessons of history is that people, they get through things and they get rid of tyrants and things get better.
Hmm. Definitely. And I was kind of thinking of that John Lennon quote. I'm going to butcher it, but it's like when you are violent against the state, they know what to do with you. But if you use like humor and wit and, parody and all this, the tools of the mind, rather, they don't know what to do. And you kind of highlight some people near the end of the book that definitely fit that category. I definitely think of Pussy Riot and
Yeah.
Rush in that kind of tradition. So yeah, I think that it really they don't know like they don't like they're like I can arrest someone, I can beat someone, but it's like if you like make a clever remark or whatever, they're not always sure about what to do with that or some kind of other piece of art that is a little harder to pin down.
Yeah, that's really important, and it gives hope to people. And some of the people I interviewed for the book are doing that exactly that kind of work, using humor, or like I interviewed. I also interviewed him, did a follow up for the newsletter, Robin Bell, who projected onto Trump International,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some of his things they're serious, but they're also humorous. So
Yeah.
there are ways of getting messages to the public that are designed to energize people so they don't feel so hopeless.
Oh, definitely. And if I can say anything good thing about those last couple of years is I felt much more protective of corny things like the First Amendment and things that you kind of take for granted when things are a little less a state of emergency all the time. And I definitely got complacent with certain things. Growing up, not having one of these leaders necessarily. Although I mean, you could make an argument for different presidents, I guess, at different qualities, but still, it's like it wasn't to that degree, and it was like I definitely during the Obama administration, I got kind of complacent on
Mhm.
certain things like that, and it's a little, it makes you kind of reevaluate what's important when you think it could go away at any time, because it can, like you said, it was a rare and unheard of thing that Trump got voted out. Most of the time, that just doesn't happen, especially when there isn't an election. Putin has elections, or he did, so.
Mhm.
But
Exactly.
yeah.
So we can hold
Well,
on to that.
yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, I've taken up almost an hour of your time, and I really appreciate it. And one question I always ask before we go is, what music have you been listening to lately?
Oh, I'm a huge electronica fan.
Cool.
Um, so oh gosh, I don't even know what bands I've been listening to. Let's see, I don't have anybody in mind. Yeah, and actually listening to music got me through the writing.
Mm,
Um, I listen to Bonobo a lot. I've been listening to Kate Trinada, he's a Canadian DJ. Steve Lacy, a lot of German kind of electronic techno people like Ben Bomer,
mm,
uh, and back to like classic like Massive Attack,
mm.
that kind of thing. But yes, many evenings writing the book, I was kind of blasting electronica. So I continue to do that.
Is Massive Attack kind of like trip hop, maybe though?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
okay?
That's
Yeah.
they're from the 90s,
Yeah,
really.
I
Uh,
remember. I think I had one of their CDs. I had them and Portishead. Uh, yeah, that whole thing. But yeah, I like them too. So cool.
Yeah, so that's I kind of I listen to jazz sometimes too, but for writing, I I kind of stay with electronica. It kind of energizes me. I like it.
That makes sense. Can you listen to lyrics while you're writing? I find that difficult sometimes. I love to listen to, yeah.
That's why electronica
Right.
or trance or it's unless I know the song very well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why electronica is good.
I know. Yeah, it's like the word making part of my brain and the listening to words that other people say. It's like they're fighting.
Yes, exactly.
So cool. Well, I again, thank you so much. I really enjoy your work. I've admired your work for quite a while, and I'm really honored that you took the time tonight. And I hope that you come back again. It was a lot of fun. So
yes, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Have a good night. I appreciate it.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, RSS, and now Spotify. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. If you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Also, if you want to call or text the show for any reason, the number is 317-674-3547. Until next time.